You're listening to a social justice podcast, an exploration of our world's social issues, hosted by Nicola Spurling on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwikwetlem, Katzie, and Qayqayt peoples. Hello, this is a social justice podcast. I'm your host, Nicola Spurling. Yes, I'm losing my voice a little bit today, and I'm also joined by Jessie Anderson of Big Bros Barbershop, and we're going to be talking about the importance of a good haircut and how Big Bros supports gender diverse people. Jessie, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hello. I'm Jessie Anderson. I'm the owner of Big Bros Barbershop, which primarily functions as a barbershop and a salon. But our sort of most practical application in the community is that we are sort of a resource center and hub for trans folks in Vancouver and beyond. So stoked to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining the podcast. And to start things off, can you explain the importance of a good haircut for a gender diverse person?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when presented with transition as a concept, it is extremely scary if you don't know the ins and outs of it. Or frankly, if you do know the ins and outs of it, so that's also pretty scary. I think a lot of people have this idea that you kind of like declare yourself trans, you walk into the sex change machine, and you walk out the other side a different person. When there are so many different ways that you can explore your gender and the way that you present your gender externally. And a haircut is such a simple, reversible, affordable way to get the process started. We communicate so much of who we are through our hair. That's one of the first things you see when you look at somebody. And so we can not only give people haircuts that make them feel like good and confident and sexy or whatever they're looking to present, but because our staff is also trans, we have some insight into what people are looking for as far as like self-conscious about this. I want to enhance this. We can work on, if someone is starting from really short hair, but they want to feminize their hair, we can cut different like angles in there. We can texturize it differently and kind of keep it from being a quote unquote men's cut. We can, I've like sharpened out someone's hairline to give it more of a masculine shape to it if they haven't like grown their own receding hairline yet. There's so many ways to just play with hair and presentation in general, and I think that's the fun part of gender exploration.
Right. And is that a difficult process to learn how to do? Because I'm guessing when you're working within the hairdressing industry, you're not coming across trans people super often, at least like in schools or for the average hairdresser. But your business is primarily focused on gender diverse people. So there are probably some tips and tricks that you've had to learn over the years about how to make those haircuts look particularly masculine or make a person look more masculine or feminine. Is that a skill that's difficult to acquire?
Difficult, maybe yes and no. I would say difficult for the average person. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. I come from my own history of being dysphoric about my gender presentation. So I know the things that I was self-conscious about with my hair and my presentation. So many of my friends and partners and family are trans people who I talk to about what they're self-conscious about with their hair presentation. And I mostly got my start looking up like drag tutorials online.
Oh,
Um, so I mean, drag is such an exaggerated performance of gender, and there's so many tips and tricks within that are kind of perfect for like the first stage of coming out, where you are sort of like over exaggerating certain parts of your presentation. Like, I'm not a particularly masculine guy, but pre-T, I was trying to butch up in as many ways as possible to just like communicate masculinity to people as much as possible. And
mhm.
then as my hair started receding, as my beard started coming in, I was able to like, oh, I can like fem out a little bit more because now people get the gist of what I'm trying to communicate, and I can kind of relax those other things that I was trying to like harden and like masculinize for the overall communication beforehand. So I think it comes down to like lived experience, talking to community members. I mean, the work that we do is talking to trans people about their thoughts and feelings all day, every day, and that improves our work. Like that makes us better at our job because people trust us with communicating what they're looking for and what sort of things they're like hoping to accentuate, hoping to communicate.
Right, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, sort of need to be hyper mask or hyper femme at the beginning or early in the transition, because that's something that I went through myself, and it's something we've talked about in this podcast. I actually call it the boomerang effect, where, you start going to this extreme and then you sort of find yourself, or you become more comfortable in your appearance and you swing back the other direction again. And I've definitely noticed that for myself, where I've been a lot more comfortable not focusing on being as feminine as possible, because I've reached a point where I either don't care, or people see me the way that I want them to see me regardless. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I know that you come from very humble beginnings. So can you explain what inspired you to start Big Bros Barbershop and how that all began?
Yeah, it was sort of a culmination of different things that brought, Big Bros together as a concept. One was I felt like there wasn't any, like, physical brick and mortar space dedicated to trans wellness anywhere in this city, or, like, anywhere that I had heard of. Um, I felt like a lot of places might be LGBT friendly, inclusive, but they know what that entails more for the L and the G, maybe for the B, not so much for the T. And then, like, there was, like, the Catherine White Holman Wellness Center, which is a great resource, but it was a pop-up. It would be
Mm,
something that you had to catch that, like, one day of the month that it was available. And same for dance parties or whatever. It was always some space that was, like, rented out for a night and then, like, torn down without a trace. So it made the presence of trans people in the greater community feel so underground and secretive, which is kinda sexy. Like, that's kind of fun too, but when you're trying to, like, connect with other people, fight for rights, fight for your, like, presence in your city, it hurts to not have physical space that is constantly available to you. And I know that, like, for my coming out process and for a lot of people, you sort of go through, you're like, "Okay, I realize I'm trans now." Then you're like, "So what do I do tomorrow? Like, what happens now?"
mhm.
Um, and so I liked the idea of a space that was low barrier, low stress to just, like, walk into and physically interact with another trans person, where I could be like, "Hello, I'm Jessie, I'm trans, I'm standing here between 10 to 6 every day. Come and find me here." I had been working at Little Sisters Bookstore, for, like, 4 years. I was working the day that Jim Diva passed away. That was, like, a hugely it was a huge surprise. He was at work earlier
Mhm.
that day, went home, fell off a ladder, and snapped his neck. So, like, nobody knew that changeover was gonna be happening. It, like, disrupted some things about the workspace that I was not particularly into, and I wanted to take everything that I loved and held dear about Little Sisters and update it for the new generation. Gay and lesbian people obviously still need protections, but not in the same way that they did in the '80s. So I wanted to sort of prioritize trans people in the space. A bookstore is a great idea, but also we have Amazon now, and that is scary. And I don't claim to know how to disrupt that industry. So I wanted something that was a tactile, physical thing that you couldn't download and that would facilitate conversation. So, and with haircuts, people would have to come back at a certain regular pace. And it was a very non intimidating venue for clients to come and just talk if they wanted to, or not, or talk for their at their 7th haircut after 6 silent ones.
Right. And so at this time, did you know how to cut hair, or was that something that you had to learn based on this business idea that you had?
So I was the gay in the friend group with the clippers.
Okay.
So I did cut hair. Did I know how to cut hair? Mm, Um, but at around this time, I went to barber school and was able to, like, actual hone in, the craft as opposed to just being like, "Ah, I got a living room and, I'll wrap a garbage bag around your neck and we'll make something happen."
Right. And I know that you specialize in, more masculine haircuts, but that's obviously not all that Big Bros does at the moment. So how did you go about building a team that encompasses other specialties to the point that people like me as trans women can come in and now book appointments?
Yeah, I mean, the core aspect of Big Bros when it first opened, even when it was just me, is that as far as intent goes, it was always open to everybody. I knew how to do women's haircuts as well. That said, it's going to be a different experience for, like, a 13-year-old trans man to, like, come to my shop and, like, have me as their trans elder versus, like, a similarly aged trans woman who is like, I just need a women's haircut. You're not really like, I'm not gaining from this more than I would anywhere else, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, so it was really important to me to basically build a team that looked nothing like me,
Right,
nothing
okay.
like each other. Um, I really wanted to pull from as many different backgrounds as possible, as many different transition experiences as possible, as, like, diverse lived experiences as I could, while also like, everyone having some tie to the trans community, and all being people who applied to work for me. Like, so there were restrictions within that, because the shop has been growing like quickly in a sense, but slowly, as far as like, we incorporate one or maybe two staff members every few years. Um, I'm in a good position where I can kind of collect the job applications that we get over the years, have them in the back of my mind, sort of like, "Oh, okay, I know there's like this person had applied at one point, this person had applied at one point." And then when I am hiring, I can like start sending out direct emails to like, "Hey, I know you reached out like 2 years ago. If you're still interested, now's the time. Now's the time."
Right.
Um, that has kind of helped me curate the mixed group that we have now. And yeah, we all have like different hairdressing experience as well. So there are a lot of people on staff with more of a focus on feminizing hair, and like more of an interest in like show quality hair. Like I like a good sort of, you just you come in, you get a nice practical haircut, you don't spend much money, and you head on out. But of course that's not for everyone. Sometimes you want to like get photo shoot ready. And so there's other stylists here that have a lot more like care and passion for that, the extra flair.
Right. And so with that in mind, what are some of the services that you now offer?
So, the way that we've divided the haircuts in our booking is, we have an option for a basic barber cut, which is not a gender implication. It's an implication of just like that is your standard. You come in, the hair gets shorter, whatever that looks like for you, and then you go home. And then we have a luxurious salon cut, which again is not a gender implication. It comes with a wash, more time for styling at the end. Like there's just more time, more care, more luxury, attached
Mhm.
to that. And then also I offer hot towel shaves, which I had offered at the old location, but the equipment just wasn't keeping up with me. I needed to upgrade my space and my equipment to do them properly again. And we've actually been getting a lot of people like buying hot towel shaves for their partners for their birthdays and stuff like that, which is very, very sweet.
Okay.
We do hair coloring. We've got now 4 colorists. Plus Zed, who rents a separate suite, out of Big Rose. They do color as well. And then a wide variety of gender affirming products, or wide variety. At this point, we've kind of condensed to just compression wear. I was having some trouble like ordering prosthetics from the States, and like I get wary about the wrong parent finding out that we were offering prosthetic body parts and
Mm.
getting again becoming a hullabaloo. So now I'm like, Spanx. We basically sell Spanx. So we've got binders and we've got gaffs. We've got binding tape. Um, and then we also have a rotating free selection of binders, um, to kind of keep up the ongoing like trans mask tradition of when you get your top surgery or you're done with your binder for whatever reason, you pass it on to somebody else. So people will drop off their previously owned binders, and then we just give those out for free.
Right, and you also do a sliding scale as well, right?
Yeah.
There's, I think 3 price ranges?
Yes. So for all of our services, we have a default price, which is basically that's the price that I have declared for the service. If that's uncomfortably expensive for somebody, they can pay $5 less, and it's $5 per hour. So if they're doing like 4 hours of color, it would be $20 off. And if they want to help supplement somebody else doing that, they can pay $5 more per hour. And there's no barriers attached to that. It's sort of our equivalent to like youth or senior pricing, but like the lots of people have financial needs at different times in their life. So every haircut we pitch, like here's the cost, or you can pay less, or you can pay more. Whatever you're paying is correct.
Right. Oh, I love that. And you've also relied on sort of a niche and the support of local queer communities to grow your business. And I know that that's really helped you to sort of get into your first space and to grow from there. But you also really give back to community as well. So can you talk about the ways that Big Bros shows up for local communities and people in need?
Yeah, I mean, we've because we're one of the like the go-to trans resources at this point in time. I feel like because the community of resources is small enough, we kind of just like reach out to each other for like odds and ends type stuff. So like we hosted a focus group for women against violence against women because they needed a space and they wanted to like introduce some like not just women into like come access Weba's resources. And so Big Bros offered a nice, safe, like neutral in a sense space to do that in. What have we done? We've done lots of different like fundraisers for things. We've had like different trans artists and authors like have their books in the reception area and sell their wares alongside our gender affirming products. When we were first opening, we did some collaborations with Pace Society where they're like sex worker trans clients or like just sex workers over 40 was one of the groups. They would do like little field trips to come and sort of take over the space for a bit with like people that they were already acquainted with. We've also done that with Urban Native Youth Association and Green City Housing. It's just really cool. I like the field trips a lot because you get to see people explore the space not just as an individual, but like with the comfort of their immediate peers and like whatever their group leader is as well. Like
Mhm.
there's some added just like, oh, this is my space for the next few hours.
Right, and so
um,
are they
yeah.
coming there to get haircuts, or are they coming there just to explore the space and hang out? What does that look like?
It depends on the organization. We've most recently the easiest way we've been able to do it is to book off a certain like block of time for haircuts, get like a general estimate of how many people are showing up who will want hair appointments so that we
Mhm.
make sure that we're staffed accordingly. But from there, like sometimes they'll bring other people along who are just there for the vibes. Green City Housing used to do their field trips were more for the products, so they would come in for like maybe not like hours at a time, but would the posse of I think like 4 or 5 trans youth would come in together and shop for the products together. Yeah, just anything where we can facilitate that sort of like structured support is really cool.
Right, and you said that people are there sort of for the vibes. What are the vibes that you're trying to create as someone walks in the door? Like, what are you hoping that they're, feeling and getting out of that?
So my hope is that our space kind of functions as like an oasis from how crappy the world is out there. Um, I think that we are a pretty actively left-leaning political space, but presentation-wise, I like us to be more fun and camp and relaxed. So the space is very like soft pastel pink. We've got a poster of the Spice Girls up on the wall. I like it. I like to keep things a little tongue in cheek around here while still have that underbelly of like we are well equipped to like provide accessibility information to host people of all genders and all races and all like neurodiversities. We have those core foundations, but the space itself is like almost jokey while also being
Mm.
very serious. It's meant to feel a little like wonderlandy.
Right, and I guess that's become a lot easier to create now that you're in this new space. So can you talk about the development of the spaces? I know you started in a small little warehouse and you've worked your way up into this space that you've really recently moved into that I went to and it looks fantastic. So how did you get from one to the other?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, the first space, I think it was 300 square feet, and it was like a concrete box. It was an art studio upstairs from a warehouse. The sinks, the bathroom, the windows were out in the main space. I did not have access to any of that in my little square, and we were there for like about 6 months or so. It was a perfect place to first land because I was 24 when I opened
Mm.
Big Bros. Um,
Great.
and I wanted to make sure that other people were going to show up, and it wasn't just me being like, "I think I have a good idea. I'm gonna invest all my money." And so that was a space where I could pay my rent in cash month to month. Like I was not signing contracts for a lease or anything. I had some room to kind of like softly land. Um, and then from there, we moved to our space at Nanaimo and East First, which was about 800 square feet, which was great. It really served as a space for us to grow into. When we first opened, it was like basically just me in this space with like my one chair and my one rack of binders.
Wow.
Um, it felt so barren. And then Zed, my colleague, moved in and took over the back half of the shop. Thank God, because it really helped with rent. Um, and then from there, we grew the team a little bit more and we like got more equipment and more furniture. Um, and then as we were growing more and more and having more needs for equipment and capacity, um, we got like a regular sized washer versus my little like apartment sized one, but there was nowhere to put it. So it blocked access to a sink. We had a dryer that kind of halfway blocked our bathroom door. Our heating and cooling in the space was a nightmare. Like we were just, it was getting the job done, but it was getting harder and harder for us to do our job effectively. And especially with things like climate change, making the summers warmer each year. When I first started at Nanaimo's first, the summers were okay. But as my team was getting bigger, the space started getting hotter and hotter. And I'm like, okay, now I'm responsible for these people's well being. And it is physically too warm for us to be open every day in the summer. Like, this is not sustainable. So, our current space at Nanaimo East Broadway, so it's just like 8 blocks south of where we were, we're in 1,200 square feet now. And this was the big project of like, I want to make a space for us to grow into moving forward. So we moved into a shell space and renovated it completely to suit our needs. So we weren't working around pre-existing heating or plumbing or anything like that.
That was
And
quite a process too, wasn't it?
oh boy, it is a bigger project than I realized it was going to be. It was like 2.5 years in the making. Like we had other versions of the plan that fell flat. Yeah, the whole thing, like the renovations themselves cost me about $180,000, and then like plus on top of like double rent and moving and like all the other things, it came in like closer to almost $300,000, which was more than my $100,000 budget. I had to just sort of keep taking out loans and just rolling with the punches because every step of the way, I'm like, I've signed contracts. We're pressing forward. That's all we can do. The only way out is through. Um, and so the new space is gorgeous. I'm very excited to be settling into it. But yeah, it's been throwing me for a loop for some time. But being able to customize it, like the other spaces, I was sort of picking out like one piece of furniture at a time, replacing things as they broke. Whereas with this space, we were buying everything from scratch at the same time. So we got to kind of curate more of an intentional aesthetic. And like, particularly because the shop is called Big Bros Barbershop, I know that comes with a masculine like inclination. So I wanted to kind of feminize the inside of the shop to kind of even it out a little bit, like keep people on their toes a little bit. Like, what is this
Mhm.
space? Who is allowed in here? It's like, oh, literally anybody.
Yeah, I remember getting that question. I posted a picture when I first went to Big Bros and got my
Yeah.
haircut, and people go, "Why are you going to a barber shop?" And I said, "It's not just that. Like, it's so much more, and you really have to experience what it's all about, I think, to understand that." And I hope that that's what people get out of it when they come into your new space. They get to experience what you're all about. And I want to pivot a little bit and talk about what it's like to be trans in business. And you've had now about a decade of experience with this. So do you find that the business world is more difficult to navigate as a trans person? Is it preferable to being a trans employee, for instance?
Mm. I mean, I would definitely prefer it to being a trans employee overall. I think there's certain places that are well equipped for trans employees. Like from what I've noticed observationally, I feel like Starbucks is kind of that's part of their shtick now. Everyone, every trans person has their shift at Starbucks at some time in their life. When I was coming in and out, it was the porn shops on Davy, and not because they were equipped for it, but just because they were like that. We literally don't care. Please come work our counter. As far as like difficult to navigate the business world, I feel like I'm kind of removed enough that I don't run into a whole lot of issues, but um, it is definitely always interesting whenever I'm like going to go give a talk or something, because I kind of underestimate how little the general public knows about trans people. And so I'll think I'm breaking it down, and then at the end, like during a Q&A or something, someone will be like, "Oh, it never occurred to me that trans people faced issues in this world." And I'm like, "Oh, I should have broken this down way more." Like I didn't
Yeah.
realize that's how disjointed we were starting from. And it has been like, I think the most boggling part throughout the process is the amount of free labor that people expect from me, which to a certain extent I don't mind. Like, I do want to contribute to like not just amplifying my brand, but like amplifying wellness for trans people in other businesses, other locations, what have you. But like, I've been asked by like cis-owned, technically competing businesses to like order their products for them, like give them free tutorials on how to sell product. Like, it's just
Oh,
so much
wow.
just like, well, we wanna make money off of trans people, so you do it for us. Come fix our place for free so that your clients come to us instead. I
Mhm.
don't want to. That is not in my best interest at all.
Mhm.
I find that probably most common are people wondering, like other businesses reaching out to ask how to sell binders, which again, good start, and I appreciate the initiative on that. Um, but really and truly, the answer that I have for all those businesses is hire a trans person. Because
Mhm.
even if I give you the best tutorial in the world, if you just start selling products for trans people, what's gonna end up happening is you're gonna end up with some trans youth wandering in to this completely cis staffed place having questions, and the staff is like, I don't know, I don't know. And then just everyone feels weird and uncomfortable and no one has a good time. So like you just hire staff people or trans people on your staff, and then trans people can be comfortable in the space,
Mhm.
rather than reaching out to like the one trans person through the business network and being like, "Can you just like let your people know that they should spend money at my place?"
Right. Well, I think it's funny that you mentioned that you sort of overestimate how much people know because I find that as well, partly through this podcast, but also in giving talks in communities as well, where I'll just say something like "I'm trans," and then I'll continue on with my conversation, and I'll get to the end, and someone will come up to me and goes, "I don't. What does it mean to be trans?" I go, "Oh wow, we really are starting from nothing here." I
Yeah.
forget that some people just pay absolutely no attention to some of these issues.
I mean, a thing that I have not really run into this in the business world as much, but just as far as where people are often coming from, I know that me and like other trans men that I know have had the experience where people kind of know that trans women exist.
Mhm.
Some, if they're really educated, know that trans men exist as well. So what'll happen is a trans man is like, "Oh, by the way, I'm trans," and they're like, "So you want to be a woman?" It's like, "Oh no,
Right.
I did it already."
The change
We're
has
caught
occurred.
up. Yeah.
Right. Uh,
And so, yeah, when you're coming from a place where someone is like, yeah, as you say, just fundamentally trying to catch up with like, okay, so when you say you're trans, what does that even mean?
right. And do you experience that at all with people maybe walking by your barbershop and going, "Oh, hey, what is this? Let me walk in and find out," and they don't realize what the concept is and you have to explain it to them, or are you mostly getting clientele that already know about you and what you are?
I mean, we have structured ourselves a little bit to like really cater to trans and queer people and people who know what we're about by design. The way that sort of looked at our old location when we were booked up all the time was we literally didn't have time for walk-ins. So
Right.
yeah, and so because we didn't have time for walk-ins, you had to go through the website to book an appointment, and in doing so, you had to kinda see what we were about. But we've had lots of just random walk-ins over the years react in a variety of different ways. You would be shocked at how long it takes people to notice that there's something fruity about this place.
The trans flags in the front.
It's simply not enough. People will
Mhm.
not see it, people will not acknowledge any of it. Um, but yeah, I've had, like, random guys walk in where they will, like, suddenly realize that there's, like, something amiss about the space and be like, I have to go get my, wallet from the car, I'll be right back," and then they just run away. Uh, but then we've also had guys who have, like, come in and enjoyed their haircut and, like, really settled into the space. I think, a lot of my, like, straight cis walk-in clients, really resonate with the space because I will talk to them about their feelings.
Mm,
Like, I have men who come to me to talk about, like, divorce is hard. How do I navigate going through a depression? Like, these really hard-hitting topics that I think just, like, men don't have the space to talk about, and we are men who talk about our feelings, like the men who
right.
are here, you know? Um, so I think a lot of different people gain something from this space than what they expected when they first walked in. But one of my, like, first walk-in experiences that really tickled me was, back in the old space when I'd first opened. I had some newspaper articles about us up on the wall, and, this guy walked in and I was like, "Oh, I'll be ready in, like, just a couple minutes. I'm just sweeping up." And so it gave him time to kinda look around, and, he saw these articles and he's looking at them, and I think English was also not his first language, so he was, like, at a double loss where he's like, "I don't understand what this like, what does transgender mean? What is this place?" And so I explained, like, what trans was and that I was also trans. And he was like, "Oh, I've never met a transgender person." I was like, "Well, you probably have." And he was, oh my God, I probably have. His world just opened right up, and it was the perfect response. And so, yeah, we've definitely had more positive experiences than negative ones, but that is again partially curated through our process of like essentially the end game is to not end up with a straight cis man realizing where he is halfway through a haircut while he feels trapped while processing feelings.
Right. Yeah, that's not comfortable for either one of you, I'm guessing.
No.
And have you had instances like that?
I mean, no one's been, like, directly, like, violent or even, like, directly hostile with us in that sense. Um, Being homophobic and transphobic, I think, is very unfashionable in Vancouver, which really works in our favor. So, usually, it ends up channeled through something else, where someone will be very abruptly dissatisfied with the haircut. And I've had that with clients of mine where everything's going fine, and then suddenly they're just like, "Well, I don't like the cut," even though, like, nothing different has happened with the cut to be upset
Mm,
about. Um, I've had it with my employees where maybe, I had one of my employees giving a haircut, and I think they just were giving off too many queer vibes or some vibes that the client wasn't resonating with, and so they complained about the haircut, and so the employee called me over because 'cause I'm the owner, and I think I had enough, like, relatable white guy face that when I was like, "Oh, no, I think the cut seems to be okay, like, is it what's not working for you?" He's like, "You know what? I was a total asshole about that. I'm sorry, man." Like, just instant turnaround. So, like,
uh,
people do channel their prejudices in very, like, kinda underhanded ways.
right.
So as the business owner, I've just kind of learned to uh, read between the lines and like, if someone is complaining about a haircut, obviously we want everyone to be happy with their hair. And so sometimes someone has a complaint and we deal with it. And sometimes I will assure the employee afterwards, like that person wasn't talking about the hair.
Right,
That
there
had
was something
nothing to
else
do with you.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder, I'm guessing that that's an improvement over, like, you were talking about Little Sisters before, they used to get bombed, right? And, uh, we're sort of hopefully past that point, but it is scary with some of the rhetoric that's coming up from down south. Are you worried about, where that might take things? Are you still feeling like Vancouver's a really safe space and so it's less of a concern here? Or, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's scary because I don't think that there's a lot of people that would cause us harm. Unfortunately, it only takes one person with a lot of feelings
Right.
and who to follow up on an action. So I'm never feeling so distanced from the potential of like bombings or harm of some kind coming to us or the shop. Um, I think as far as like neighborhoods in Vancouver go, this one is great. I read, the graffiti up Broadway as my morning news, basically, and more often than not, it is very trans positive graffiti, so I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is our people." Yeah, I am also, like, just unfortunately because of how we live in a society, I think we are protected because I'm a dude. I think
Mm.
the people who are feeling violent about trans people are feeling violent about trans women. And I think that if I were a trans woman who had opened the space, we would be getting constant bombardment. And
Mm.
because I'm a trans guy, people leave us alone.
Right. You can't escape sexism, I guess.
100%.
Mhm. And, I mean, we talked already about how you were involved with Little Sisters, and you also have sort of this, history of activism, from a very young age, it sounds like. So what lessons did you learn from both your involvement at Little Sisters as well as your activism, and how did those experiences help you to build the connections that you needed to start this business?
I think it's been really beneficial for me to have interacted with queer people through the changing of time. I haven't, I'm 34. I have not been alive for that long. But I have been actively participating in queer communities really since I was like 14. So being able to interact with so many different social circles and activism groups and organizations within all of that, I have come to understand queerness through so many different lenses, and not all of them, like, because that would take forever. Um, it would really show my hubris to think that my perspective alone could reflect a community, which in part is why I want staff, in general, but also I think that, when I was, like, first coming out, I hung out mostly with a group of, like, essentially we called ourselves cross dressers because trans wasn't really a word yet. Non-binary certainly wasn't yet, at least to our awareness. And all of us were queer, but we didn't really talk about it. It was not really a topic of conversation. It wasn't really an identifier. That was an interesting introduction before entering communities where like labels were so important. And it was such a topic of conversation where like you want to discuss the nuances of gender and sexuality and all these things. And so, yeah, I think it also gives me a frame of reference as far as what the needs of the community will be moving forward. Not that I have distinctive answers, but I have seen enough of the changing needs of the community from at least like 2004 to 2025. That is
Mhm.
a big span of time. Um, and I think it gives me a lot of hope during these unprecedented times, as far as perspective and history repeating itself and all of this. I had a client yesterday who is a fairly recent immigrant to Canada, and they were talking about having a friend in the States right now who is like obviously terrified and overwhelmed by like the new Trump administration. And they were like, "Man, this just reminds me of home." You're just catching it like all these like backwards laws and stuff. It just makes me nostalgic. You'll be fine. Like you'll press through. Um, and so I think having a perspective of like how transness and queerness is looked at in the world, how it's been looked at over time, it does offer sort of a cushion looking forward into these dark times for like, okay, there will be ups and downs. When gay people and lesbians started becoming more like there was more mainstream awareness, everyone suddenly knew that gay and lesbian people existed. It came with hatred. It came with
Right.
louder, um, yeah, louder opposition.
Right.
Um,
Him with some Jerry Springer.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Like, back like Ellen's show getting canceled because she said she was gay and then she had to just like
Right.
disappear for a few years. Um, and so like I found it very jarring and scary once we started entering like the post Caitlyn Jenner era where suddenly everyone was aware of transness and it became like a political topic instead of like a thing some people do.
Mhm.
Um, but in those times I could look at the cycles of history and like, okay, things have gotten better for gay and lesbian people. Like, again, not perfect, but there's been so much progress. That's going to be our future. That's what we can look ahead to. That'll be the next cycle.
Right. And I mean, I came out just before Caitlyn Jenner did, and I know that you've been out for much longer than that. And what I've noticed for myself is that it's become more challenging to connect with people who are just coming out. That could be for a variety of reasons, whether the climate's changed and I don't quite understand what it's like to be coming out in today's society, or it could just be, I want to put that point of my life behind me in some ways. I don't want to keep focusing on that because I've moved on to some degree. But you're in an industry where you're serving trans people, I'm guessing, of all different stages of transition. So are you finding that it's a challenge to connect with those what we might call baby trans people? Is that something that you bring in staff to help with? How do you manage that aspect?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's specifically challenging because I talk to so many different types of trans people all the time.
Hmm.
And I think trans people are pretty unique, not exclusively trans people, but I would say queer people in general, and especially trans people,
Hmm.
where our lived age and our like out age are both very different but very relevant. So I will have clients who are in their 50s, but they came out 6 months ago, and so I am their elder. Like that is a very real dynamic. And so I'm interacting with people of different real life ages mixed with different trans ages all the time. Um, and there are so many different perspectives within that. And so like I would say there are certainly ways in which I do not necessarily relate to people who are freshly coming out, but in a way where like that's also okay. Like I can have conversations with them and relate in certain aspects while also like it doesn't need to get that much deeper than like you're here for this like half hour to an hour. like,
Right, there's
you know.
this mutual respect, you're here for a service, that sort of thing.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
I kind of have an unofficial like policy for myself where I generally don't date anyone within their first year or 2 of transition, because to me, it reminds me of me as a teenager.
Yeah.
I don't wanna date that.
This is the same thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too close.
Hmm.
Um, but like one of my friends has a young trans girl daughter who is like about 10 or so. Um, and she has grown up in such a queer household and community. I'm sure she has experienced some sort of hardship in her life. I don't think transphobia is necessarily one of them. And so she was asking about our barber pole, the trans flag barber pole that we have. She's like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, that was a gift from my grandfather who lives in Tennessee. He found this barber pole and painted it with the trans colors and sent it to me as a surprise." And she's looking at it, and she's like, "But it's only got the pink and the blue. It doesn't have the white stripe on it." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, well, he's a boomer in Tennessee. He's got kind of a loose understanding of the trans flag colors, but like it was a very, very sweet gesture." He's like,
Hmm.
"No, it's wrong. I hate it. It's so gross." And I'm like, "I love that this is your idea of oppression. That is adorable." I hope you grow up with that as well. Like I hope the world only gives you like that level of like, I can't believe you would oppress me in this way.
Right. Yeah, I
And
mean, I guess that's a nice place to be for someone who has faced some really difficult, I guess, oppression in their life. They might go, "Oh, look at this entitled person," but in reality, it's a really good sign that that person hasn't had those experiences, and so they don't have to pick and choose what they think is, bad enough to be concerned about, I guess.
yeah, I mean, I think a very funny symptom of time changing in our favor is that trans kids can kind of be dicks now. Like, because trans teenagers can just act like teenagers because they
Mhm.
don't need to present this like perfect version of themselves. I know when I was coming out, I felt very much like every assessment, every time I was talking to someone about being trans, I felt like it was a job interview and I had to prove what a worthwhile member of society I was. And I think now we're entering a time where trans people can kind of relax and just be themselves, which if you grew up with that understanding or like came out with that understanding of like needing to present as like the best version of yourself and like please incorporate us into your society, it's off-putting to see trans people, openly flawed.
Right.
And so I can see both sides of that coin for any version of what that flaw might be.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess I mean, that's probably the case with anything where there's just these generational divides. "Well, I had to deal with this. Why don't you have to struggle with this?" And people, I guess, feel resentful maybe that they don't have the same struggles that a new generation doesn't have the same struggles that they had, when in reality, that's just a really positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is weird to unlearn your own version of what you like hid in yourself in order to fit in. Like
Mhm.
I I obviously don't relate or support it, but I understand that like the gay, lesbian, bisexual movement of people or like the I don't remember the formal name of the organization, but like the gay, lesbian, bisexuals who like want to kick the trans out of the community because they're like we're not affiliated with them. Like that's so rude and stupid and all the things, but I see the foundation of, like, we have been trying so hard to be taken seriously, can you stop doing that? Like, when if you've been trying to hide your own, like, "I'm not a sissy, I'm a masculine man too, just like the other men," to see people like you then, like, becoming women, I could see it, like, really unpacking some inner stuff of just, like, "That would be the worst thing I could present. Don't do that."
Right, well, and you see that now within trans communities too, that these people that are considered, I guess, true scum, which means they have this
Right.
definition of what they think is appropriate way to be trans, and, that really reflects negatively on, non-binary people, right? They think, "Oh, okay, well, I've always been told that I have to make this shift, and, I have to transition from a man to a woman or a woman to a man, and if I don't if present myself in a certain way, I'm not gonna be taken seriously. And now here's this group of people that are saying they don't identify with any gender. They're making us all look bad. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's just more freedom. It's not a bad thing, but they're placing these, I guess, this historical trauma that they've had onto this other, group of people.
Yeah, I think it's very relieving to once you like remove yourself from it, you're just like, oh, people be living. That has nothing to do with me. Great. It's I think when you see yourself in that like mirror reflection where it's like, you can't do that because I couldn't do that.
Yeah, it says more about you than it says about them.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. And we're getting kind of close to the end of this interview, and I'm curious to know, is there anything that we haven't brought up to this point that you think would be really important to mention to our audience?
I mean, this is not a new concept necessarily, but I second the voice going around that there needs to be more spaces for queer youth to access.
Right.
I think that our space is one of the few spaces for trans people that is not like sexualized or like bar centric.
Mm.
Um, and I think that there just needs to be so many more spaces for trans youth and queer youth to just like exist. I mean, we're kind of losing spaces for youth as a concept anyway. Like, are teens going to the mall anymore? Are there malls anymore? Like I think we
Yeah.
kind of as a society have to like relearn in general how teens hang out or how people hang out. Every adult I know doesn't know how to make friends too. But yeah, I think there needs to be like more focus on those designated safe spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of ones that I know exist, and I was playing soccer with some trans kids over the weekend with this group that gets together once a month, and I know community's going to be moving into a new space. They're going to have a lot more room for trans kids, but that is something that I hear as well. I get parents messaging me saying I can't find somewhere, especially if they don't live in Vancouver, like. You're out in Surrey or even further into the interior. They go, okay, well, I know that there's, one or two places I could bring my kids in Vancouver, but what is there for me in my area?
Yeah, absolutely. I think um we're headed in the right direction in that like I've seen like drag shows that are sober events or like queer
Right.
spaces that are sober events, which inherently makes them all ages. Cool,
Yeah.
fun, love
Drag
that.
story times.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, drag story time is a great example of like a youth designated one because I find my like hesitation around the sober spaces is it feels weird to have this, like, grown up hangout space that just doesn't have alcohol in it alongside, like, 10-year-olds who just wanna see a show. Like, it not that it can't happen as an intermingling thing, but, like, it is just I feel like there just needs to be some, like, some working of that idea.
Yeah.
Some
Well, and it can
expansion.
go either way, right? It could just be adults who, want to have the same type of experience that they would have at a venue where you would be drinking, but without the alcohol. And that's not going to
Exactly.
be the same type of show that a kid's going to, or it is going to be appropriate for a kid to see.
Exactly,
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah. Which, essentially, I just want us to have more spaces and more stuff.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
more stuff should happen.
More stuff should happen. I agree with you. And so with regard to Big Bros Barbershop specifically, what is your hope for the future of that?
So my end game with Big Bros is I'm hoping to convert us from a sole proprietorship to a nonprofit.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, I think that there is a lot more use and longevity to the idea of Big Bros if it is not exclusively my property.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that there's so much room for it to have turnover and like eventually maybe have nothing to do with me. Who knows? Um, but, yeah, it's a scary and overwhelming process, and I have to figure out what to do with my debt first because I
Right.
don't understand the logistics behind that. But I think it would be so cool to have us I mean, we kind of already function as a nonprofit in a lot of ways, like, we're not exactly raking in profit. Uh, but I would be excited to see us sort of, get more structure and support in being able to, like, get grants like a nonprofit in order to have a board like a nonprofit. I think getting more, voices and lived experiences in the driver's seat behind Big Bros is, a really cool and exciting long-term idea.
Yeah, that is really cool, and I know it is challenging to sort of carry debt into a nonprofit, but I do have a little bit of experience with that, so feel
Mm.
free to reach out at any point if you wanna talk about, what that looks like. With that in mind of, taking Big Bros in that direction or just with, the creation of more spaces that, youth can enjoy, what do you think our audience can do to help achieve this future that you wanna see?
I think that like being able to take whatever your project is and then like bring in people to help make it more queer and trans inclusive. Like if you run a cafe, if you like whatever it is you do, I think there's ways that you can improve making your corner of the world more of a safe space. Um, but also I think like investing towards the spaces that already exist is a great way to support. I mean, we had so many people reach out in so many different ways when we were relocating. Obviously, the GoFundMe was like a huge, easy, concrete, like, please, we just need money. Just give us money. It'll help so much. Um, but we had people volunteer like labor in helping with some of the construction elements. We had people, we were like offered like a month of free rental at Big Joy Barber and Salon when we were between spaces. I think we were offered a discounted rate at the Birdhouse when we hosted a fundraiser there.
Mm.
Um, we had someone who's just like, I like woodworking. Let me know if you need me to like build you a table. Like, just so many lovely offers of help were like, I think that coming together in that way for a project that already exists, like Big Bros, but it doesn't have to be Big Bros. Like I was saying, I think there needs to be more ways for people to like physically meet one another. And that is a great thing. I always recommend to my clients to look for volunteer opportunities to just like get out there and meet other queer people offline. And so I think that like, yeah, anywhere where you can like figure out, okay, these are the things that I have to offer. Where's a venue I can offer that thing? And then if other people are doing that in that venue as well, like I think that's the perfect combo.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. This has been a social justice podcast. I'm your host, Nicola Spurling, and today I've been joined by Jessie Anderson from Big Bros Barbershop. I really
Thanks
appreciate
for
your
having
time.
me. Yeah, totally. Happy to be here.
You've been listening to a social justice podcast, an exploration of our world's social issues, hosted by Nicola Spurling on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwikwetlem, Katzie, and Qayqayt peoples.